Welcome back to another episode of the Horn Horn Podcast. I'm your host. As always, make sure to check out the show on all social media platforms at the Horn on One Podcast on most social media platforms. www.tjojp.com. Got the Occultus Mundi on there. Also on the Ko-Fi store. Occultus Mundi, Homunculus Owner's Manual, comic book, all that good stuff. Patreon.com/the Horn on One Podcast. If you want to rock some merch and all that, that's also on the website. And joining us today is the infamous Joel Thomas. What's up, dude?
What's up, brother? I don't feel like this is actually like a podcast because we talk a lot. So
yeah, we literally have like 2-hour conversations on the phone that could friggin' be shows all on their own. So definitely, yeah, we do this on the regular. There's a lot of hours that we haven't recorded that we've just talked so much about so many things.
Dude, I've known you for 3 years. So like, yeah, probably 100 hours of podcast material that we've talked on the phone.
Has it been that long already, dude?
Yeah, dude, it's crazy. I was looking at when I started doing all this. I looked at when I first met Tony, because that's kind of when all this stuff happened. Because man, I had no interest in podcasting. And I laugh. The first 2 podcasts I ever listened to were The Confessionals and Isaac Weishaupt's. And then 4 years later, I've working with both of them and a lot of other people. So it's been pretty cool, man. And now that I've got my own podcast, I'm having a blast doing it, man. I get to really just
plug your stuff for the people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me pretty much anywhere that streams podcast. Obviously, the normal stuff on the RSS feed like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Podbean, anywhere. Just look up Free the Rabbits. It's a Merkle Media product, so you can go check me out there. It's generally a solo show. It's me breaking down various topics. Some of it's conspiratorial, some of it's more religion-based, some of it's ancient history. I jump around a lot. It's just whatever I'm interested in, really. So I do a lot of different things. I find that a lot of these topics interweave between each other a lot. So you'll find the occult and conspiratorial topics, or you might find, some Gnosticism over here and like some ancient history. They just tend to kind of all blend together at some point. So I think that's one thing that I'm finding as I'm digging through topics. Like I was telling you yesterday, I just did an episode about Isaac Newton, and I really wasn't planning on going the direction that I did. And as I was reading this book that I actually sent over to you, it was really interesting because like the back end of his career, like 30 years, he spent more time writing about religion and alchemy than he actually did anything scientific. As a matter of fact, he said in several letters he found it boring. So he was more about writing about things that he really couldn't publish at the time because his thoughts on certain matters would have gotten him in trouble with the Church of England, which he actually was a member of. So he had to kind of hide what he really thought about things because he needed the ability to be able to perform scientific methods and be able to have those, published so people would take those thoughts and theories on board as scientific fact. So you'll find that a lot with a lot of different things though. So yeah. And I ended up going down a whole different road. I thought I was going to go down some alchemical road, which I'm going to eventually with him, but I ended up going down a very religious road in his beef with the Roman Catholic Church, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's a really good book. I think it's called Newton the Alchemist that talks about his alchemical endeavors. And yeah, the Newton, by William R. Newman being one of he goes hard in the paint when it comes to alchemy. And they don't teach you a lot of the esoteric stuff that a lot of these prominent figures were really into. They don't teach you that in school. Right. Like we know Newton for other things, gravity and physics and all these other mumbo jumbos, but they don't talk about like, oh, he was also obsessed with like the Temple of Solomon and built a bunch of models of the Temple of Solomon, and it was actually hidden away, I think, until I want to say 2012, that a lot of his paperwork was hidden away, and I think it was sold at an auction or something or other. Something happened with the paperwork, and they hid it. They hid a lot of it, like they did with Carl Jung and his work. A lot of his work wasn't published till recently, I think 2012 as well. But yeah, you have Newton predicting the end of the world, and he was obsessed with the book Revelation. Super interesting guy. And today we're going to be talking about another interesting person, infamous person, Aleister Crowley. And I know that when does the documentary come out? I heard you guys got on the last living homunculologist of all time on there as well. That's just, those are rumors I heard. I don't know.
Yeah, we did. We actually had the only homunculologist that's ever lived, Juan Ayala, was on the documentary. And the plan is the end of summer, the first of fall. So we're probably looking at an August to September drop date. Yeah, we've got a whole revamped editing team. And I say revamped, it's really just an additional editing team to take a lot of the load off of Ward, who's really just directing and, putting all these films together, which is a lot of work. But now we've got a really cool editing team that used to work for Tim Pool, and now they're working for us, which is really cool. And these guys are phenomenal, like really good.
After they got fired from Tim Pool, they came over.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to get into that whole thing, but there's a whole debacle over there at, those studios.
That camp. Yeah. I'm familiar with
but
it.
we were already cool with those guys, and we'd worked with them over the past couple of years anyway. And so it just was a natural fit, and these guys know exactly how we like it, and they think the same way. So the films are only going to elevate from here. They're going to be great. So we got a film coming out in a couple months. When we went out to the Meadow Project, which is undisclosed location, we had signed NDAs to go to. We're out there for a week. We had some really cool, interesting stuff happen out there. That'll come out in a couple months, and then the Crowley film is dropping, like I said, August or September. I hit up Isaac the other day and let him know too, because he's been plugging it on his show, because he's in the film too, for people that know. So Tony Merkel, Isaac Weishaupt, Juan Ayala, and a bunch of other interviews that we did with people on location. We're in 4 different locations. So it's going to be our biggest film to date as far as size and scope. So it's going to be fascinating, but it's built on the back of a lot of research that I did on Aleister Crowley. And I've done just an inordinate amount over the past couple of years on his inner workings, not only within the occult, because I think that a lot of people get really captivated with that part of it, right? Because that's a very interesting part, the occult part. He was known as the wickedest man on earth and the beast. And yes, that's a major part of him for sure. But I believe there's more like 3 parts to him, maybe 4, if we want to say that there's a true self that none of us really knew, right? Or nobody really knew. But you got the occult side, this magic side of him. You've got this charlatan side of him, which some people think that he was purely a charlatan, think that he was just swindling people with all of these occult machinations. I don't think so, but I think there was a charlatan side of him, and it also leads into this other part of him, which is this secret agent side of him, this actor side of him. And it really fascinated me, his connections with the government. And as I was building this film, which is called Crowley's Melonheads, Children of the Beast, when I was building the film, a major part of it was his connections with the government, because of what we know even now about what governments talk about entities and interdimensional beings. We know last year they were in Congress talking about interdimensional beings. So we know that they're now in the modern era, they are at least putting out some knowledge to the public. I mean, obviously it's going to be diluted. They're not going to give us the real nuts and bolts. But I do think that a lot of this was already in the works, especially with Crowley. And I think it started early on in his career when he was in Cambridge, which is Trinity College. Now, there's been several writers that have done some fantastic work on tracking down a lot of what he's done. Tobias Churton is a really great one that I've read quite a bit of what he's written about Crowley, but he's got tons of books, and he talks about different parts of Crowley's life, like Crowley in America or Crowley in Paris and Crowley in England, because Crowley was everywhere. You got Richard Krasinski, who's another really good writer that talks about Crowley, and he is actually a part of the OTO currently. And then Richard B. Spence, who probably did some of the best work when it comes to Crowley being a secret agent. And that's when I really started putting pieces together with my own theories of where the film went to, because his marriage between the government and the occult was on purpose. And I believe that the governments encouraged his road into the occult because of the fact that during the period of time in the late 1800s, when he was coming up through Trinity College in Cambridge, and he was hobnobbing around with some of these other elites, I guess would be the best word for it. The occult was running rampant. The people with money and power were fascinated with it. And, you know, there were like 200,000 Freemasons in England at the time, I believe it was. And you had all of these secret societies really becoming popular. Freemasonry was more of the gateway drug. And then once you got in there, then you had access to some of these other secret societies like the Golden Dawn, which we'll talk about today, because that's kind of important with some of the secret agents.
That's kind of a misnomer too, right? Like these secret societies becoming popular.
Yeah. And it's funny when you think about it, when it's said that way, but it was the truth. It was, some of it was a socialite thing. I don't think everybody that was a part of these secret societies was involved in the occult in any sense. I don't think a lot of them are now. And I can tell you from my own experience, being a part of Freemasonry at one point in my life, it's really not, man. It's really just the social aspect.
Illuminati
Most of these guys
confirmed.
aren't into that stuff.
Sorry about
yeah,
that.
Illuminati confirmed. Yeah, but most of these guys were just in it for social purposes, man. It's a brotherhood. It's a fraternity. Yeah. Right. And really, when you think about it, if you're a part of a fraternity and there are guys in that fraternity that are in different positions in life, it just means that you've got a leg up to get somewhere that you want to go, right? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily this occult thing, which, again, that is a part of it, especially when you work your way up and the guys that are interested in that. Obviously, the gateway's there for you to get to where you want. But it's kind of how it was in England at the time when he was coming up. And, you know, really his whole journey to the occult really started when he was a kid. And when he was younger, his father was actually a part of what they called the Plymouth Brethren. And the Plymouth Brethren, or the Assemblies of Brethren, it was a nonconformist Christian movement, and it can be traced back to Dublin, Ireland in the early 1800s. And it originated from Anglicanism, but they emphasized what they called the sola scriptura, and that was the belief that the Bible is the only authority for church doctrine and practice. So no other book that's talking about God is even looked at. They were really more of a cult than they were actually a Christian denomination. And his father was a preacher, and he was a part of this Plymouth Brethren. They were very strict. He grew up in a very strict household when he was younger. But when he was 8 years old, his father has like this mouth cancer, right? And it can be cut out and he could live. But instead of doing that, the Plymouth Brethren, his brothers, convinced him that they had this electronic method. It was like an electric method plus the power of God would heal him. So he decided not to go to an actual doctor where he could get help. And he decides to try this experimental practice with the Plymouth Brethren, and he ends up dying. So when Crowley's, 8 years old, his father dies, and he blamed the Christians. And that's really where his entire life is shaped, by his father essentially being killed by the Plymouth Brethren. Not that they did it on purpose, but that's how it's happened. So what Crowley did, and if you notice a lot of Crowley's writings, everything's intertwined with Egyptian mythology, Egyptian gods, and he actually viewed himself as Horus. That was the first time that he really viewed himself as being this version of Horus, because in his mind, you had the god Osiris, and that represented his father. Then you had the brother of Osiris, which was Set, and Set represented Christianity. So Christianity killed his father, so Set killed his father, and then, the story of Isis, she goes and gets the pieces of Osiris. In some stories, she just builds the pieces of the phallus, and then she inseminates herself with this dead seed of Osiris to then create Horus. And then, as the story goes, Horus grows older and then challenges Set for the throne. And that's who he viewed himself as. And that was the moment that he viewed himself as Horus and what he was going to do to Christianity, because to him, Christianity was evil. And I know a lot of people to this day that believe Christianity are evil. And in a lot of ways, me being a Christian, I have to have a lot of empathy. One, because I spent a good portion of my life believing the same thing. And I understand that things can happen in our lives that people who are associated with a said practice do bad things to us. And because of that, we want to have nothing to do with something, because it's like, for instance, say your first 3 interactions, Juan, with white people were negative. You know what I mean? So now all white people are evil because of that. That's just a normal human reaction. And it's very normal when it comes to Christianity, because you've got a lot of people who say that they're Christians and doing pretty awful stuff. And this was an actual case where, his father died because of the Plymouth Brethren, and his father being stupid and not going to a doctor where they could have easily taken care of it and he would have lived. And the thing was, Crowley was very close to his father. So that was pretty hard on him, seeing his father die. And he decides makes it his mission to take out Christianity, with joining all of these different secret societies, creating the religion of Thelema, and trying to progress the OTO throughout the United States. And that's a lot later in 1914 through 1919 when he decides to do that. But he definitely had a moment that really shook him to his core. But as he gets older, his mother remarries, and he ends up really getting close to his uncle and his Aunt Annie. And because of his closeness to them is how he really gets attached to some of the higher life society and more of the money crowd. And not that his father didn't have money, his father did. But here's the thing. Some people think that Crowley was super rich as a kid. He really wasn't. They were more like middle upper class. So they kind of hung on the fringes of being high society. But his uncle and his Aunt Annie they were very high society. They hobnobbed around with all of the people that could get him connected. And that's really how he gets to Cambridge and Trinity College, was because of that. Because of Aunt Annie and his uncle's tie-ins to some of the bigger guys like Lord Salisbury, which Lord Salisbury, his 4 half-brothers were already previously went through Cambridge Trinity College. Now, the thought pattern is that Lord Salisbury, whose real name is Robert Talbot Gascoigne Cecil, he was the 3rd Marquis of Salisbury. Now, he served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom 3 times for over 13 years. This guy was super connected. He was also a foreign secretary. But one of the things that he was in charge of was the intelligence department. Now, the thought pattern is that he helped get Crowley into Cambridge, and while Crowley was there, Salisbury was recruiting young men to be a part of the intelligence department. And the belief is that he did indeed go to Alistair, and because of the connections between Salisbury and his uncle, he was able to help Alistair Crowley become a secret agent. And there is evidence that he was doing missions, at least for trial missions, while he was in Cambridge at Trinity College.
Who was the one with the brewing company? Was it his dad or was it his family? Because he was left a substantial amount of money.
His dad. So his dad had a brewing. Yeah, his dad had a brewing company. Again, they had money, but when you're talking about elite upper society, they weren't quite there. They were kind of in that fringe bracket, right below it. So they had money. And the thing is, if Crowley had been good with money at all, which he wasn't, he blew it left and right, he could have actually used the money that his dad made and lived a very comfortable life his entire life and never had to work. But the thing was, Crowley loved to blow money. Crowley believed that money was useless in his mind. Crowley's an odd character when it comes to his belief system. On the one hand, he was a patriot. He believed in the English rule, and on the opposite side of it, he was an anarchist. So he kind of played both ends of it, but that also lends to his duality as a person, and it shows how easy it was for him to become a secret agent, because even his sexuality, Juan, he was bisexual. And this is a known fact. This is nothing that's, hard to find. But because of his bisexuality, that was very useful in these missions that he was sent out on from England.
Looking at the numbers that he received 30,000 pounds. I think that's pounds, or 1/3 of his father's wealth when he was a boy. And that was the equivalent to about $37,000 US, which is the equivalent in that time, right from the early 1900s, is about $1.4 million in 2025, adjusted for inflation. So not a crazy amount of money, but still a substantial amount for the time. But his extravagant lifestyle and drug addiction left him bankrupt. And it was not enough to support him, obviously, because how you said, he was just blowing money left and right and going on all these occult excursions, if you will.
Well, and you have to wonder, where was he getting the money from, right? And he was blowing it like hotcakes, but he was still recouing it. And he lived a very extravagant lifestyle, especially when he did his 5-year run in the States. Man, he was staying at all of the penthouses in New York and any place else he was at. The thought pattern is that the government was paying him under the table as a secret agent because he wouldn't have been on the books, and paying him as a secret agent, which was, again, filling his coffers back up to where he could live this lifestyle. And that was a constant. And from all indications, he was really good at his job. I mean, again, because he had such a dual personality, because he was bisexual, especially when you start getting into these fraternities with a lot of men, a lot of those guys were hidden homosexuals too. It's a very useful tool. And I was reading that to be a secret agent, the high that you get off of it is almost sexual. And I've heard this from several different people who have been a part of these agencies. And because of that factor, when you factor it in with Crowley's own depravity and the things that he loved to do, that would have fed that completely. And because Crowley really didn't have a moral code, being a secret agent is perfect. If you were looking to recruit a guy, Crowley would be the guy to recruit, because you got a guy who's amoral, who doesn't care about anybody but himself, and who's got a dual personality and is also a great actor. You know, he was a decent writer, decent poet. You know, he wrote songs okay, but really people said if he wanted to get in the arts, he could have been probably a fantastic actor.
Which I think he was as well. And here's the thing. So he's always described as like this narcissist, like super self-centered. The whole debacle of him being a climber and leaving people behind. Although right here it says he wasn't definitively diagnosed as a sociopath, a lot of his behavior that he was exhibiting could be characteristics of a sociopath. But my whole thing is, right, so if we go back and we look at not even the 1900s, right, even before that, if we go back to John Dee, which by the way, I'm gonna manifest that movie, and I planted the seed with Weston Cage about the John Dee movie. Okay, all right, Weston.
I mean, I'm all for it, but make sure you do a part of it where you talk about him being a secret agent too, because he was also part of
the wealthy elite, and by the wealthy elite, I'm talking about the people in power. They have this interest in the occult, right? Let's use John Dee for an example, who. Right, the original allegedly 007 that people always talk about, right? And how he was also a spy at his time.
Not even allegedly, though, Juan, because Ian Fleming took the 007 from his signature that he used to sign the Queen's documents with. You can pull those up online.
You can.
He used to sign them. 007, the eyes of the Queen, and 7 was his magic number.
Mm-hmm. Or the 2-ball cane, you know, however you want to interpret it.
Right.
So the elites, they have this connection with the occult, even in today's standard, even the early, 20th century, with even the whole gateway experience, remote viewing, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of sort of occult / new agey in a way. But what I haven't been able to pinpoint is why this guy, aside from his sociopathic tendencies, narcissistic tendencies, being bisexual, why him? Because I always thought that he said that to like flex on people, because he was kind of sort of, when you think of a charlatan, you also think of a liar or like a snake oil salesman, right? They're lying about it. And he seemed like the kind of guy who was very ego driven, very egocentric, and would kind of, I'm also a secret agent. It's like something that you can't really truly prove, especially for that time. It's not like you can Google him or something. Although he was famous in his own right during his time, and he was recognizable around where he was at. Well, it's like, why this guy out of everyone else that could do the role? And I'm sure there was other secret agents as well, but I just found it interesting as to why they landed on Crowley.
Well, I think it had a lot to do with his family connection, to be honest with you. Take it back to Lord Salisbury being connected to his uncle, and especially his aunt, because she was a part of what they called the Primrose League. And the Primrose League was, the best way to say it, is a church-based secret society. So
the Primrose Society, you said?
Yeah, the Primrose League. So Lord Salisbury was also a part of that with Aunt Annie. And conservative principles in Great Britain. And that's where the whole phrase uphold, support God, Queen in the country, when always in God, Queen in the country, that's where it comes from, is this Primrose League. Now, they were very patriotic. So Aunt Annie was a part of this. Lord Salisbury was a part of this. So because of these connections, he gets into Cambridge College. Now, listen, Crowley was super smart. He was super intelligent, man. You don't get into Trinity College if you're not smart. That's just a fact. Matter of fact, we were just talking about Isaac Newton. Newton went to Trinity College in Cambridge, and there were many, many other great alchemists and scientists and writers and mathematicians that all went through Trinity College in Cambridge. So that's why I think he got the look. Number two, sometimes it's just something they see in you, especially if you're just dead inside. And that's the best way for me to say it. You know, if you're a recruiter and you're looking for somebody to join special forces, right? You want somebody that can not only do the job, but also doesn't really have attachments, doesn't really have these moral codes that would hold you back from being able to pull the trigger, so to say. And I think that had a lot to do with why Crowley was picked. Again, connections number one, but I think the second part was his ability to, for lack of a better word, internally shapeshift no matter who he was around. Now, you ask, you know, what's some of the other proof that he was a part of what would now be called MI5, MI6, which obviously had nothing to do back then because MI5, MI6 didn't even exist back then. There were so many different quote unquote secret services that didn't interconnect with each other at all. They ended up being rival organizations within Great Britain. This is before they finally solidified it later on with MI5, MI6. Now, we were talking about Richard B. Spence. Richard B. Spence, when he was writing his book about Crowley being a secret agent, he started contacting all of these different organizations, MI5, MI6, started talking to the federal government here. And some of the, well, they all reached back out to him, but some of them said, look, we don't have anything on Crowley. Crowley wasn't even, you know, a part of anything we did. Oddly enough, our federal government said that Crowley, they were not allowed to talk about it. That's what they responded to him with. They said, in so many words, we don't have anything, but we can't talk about it. So it's like, we don't have anything for you, is basically what they were saying. Now, when he did reach out to MI5, MI6, he ended up getting, there's a slip, and I'm about to show it now. There was a slip that was found in a folder that had Crowley's name on it, and there were documents in this folder, but there weren't any documents in the folder. There was just a slip that had his name on it, and there were supposed to be documents, and they came back and they told Richard B. Spence, well, yeah, there's a folder. It's just an empty folder with this slip with his name on it. So they clearly had a bulk of info on Crowley.
Yeah.
And they had a lot going on with Crowley that they just didn't.
That could have been destroyed. I mean, they could have had paperwork and it could have been destroyed if he was truly in as deep as they say, right? Like some black budget stuff, really, truly secret agent. It's like, hey, it's so secret, we got to throw it out. And that's not something that he could have planted himself. That's something that could have legitimately came from. Is that his handwriting or is that like an agent's handwriting?
That's the agent's handwriting. So that's the actual slip from the folder.
Do we know what that says?
I can't read it, man.
Well,
it's just got dates on it down here. He's got his name here. But essentially, it's just stating, according to Richard B. Spence, that there was documentation on Crowley within MI5, but they don't have it anymore. And they said they don't know what happened to it.
Of course.
So that's the other pretty big piece of evidence that we know that he was involved somehow, right? Mm-hmm. We know that he was working with them in some capacity. Now, there were many times that he said later on in his career that, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, where he said, oh, I did this with the government, or I did this, or I'm not allowed to talk about this. He may have very well been telling the truth. I mean, he could have been embellishing things, which I think Crowley did from time to time for sure.
100%.
But the more research that I've done on Crowley, yeah, he had a big ego, but man, he did a lot of what he said he did. I mean, he was involved in all of these different organizations. And again, he waited until he was on the back end of his life to really start talking about a lot of these interactions within what we now call MI5 and MI6.
Interesting. I'm trying to find to see if there is anyone who's, transcribed that slip there. I can't even find that slip on the internet, dude.
Yeah, it was in the book, so I was able to.
Which book is that? The Secret Agent 666?
Yep.
Yeah, I haven't read that one. That one's Richard Spence. What year is that from? That's from 2008. Damn. All right. So he's done a bit of digging, right? So let's say that he was, if we look at it from a logical perspective, let's say that they knew that he had an interest in the occult, right? We have his family connections as well. And let's say that a lot of these influential figures were also in these occult circles because of what we mentioned earlier about it being a sort of social club, maybe not so, maybe half and half, right? A lot of them were interested in the occult and all this other stuff, but a lot of them weren't. They were just there to hang out and like, hey, why don't we just put in one of our guys in there to see if they can get some dirt on these other dudes who are in there who are higher up in society or whatever it is, and maybe even get some dirt on them too, that this could be like the beginning. And what I think, dude, what I think is a lineage of like these Epstein guys, right? Where it's a lineage of them. And there's a whole sect of these people who are just put in charge in different places to get the dirt and the blackmail, because I think that's the most powerful form of knowledge. And I've said this before, where it's not the knowledge of like the Faustian bargain of like, hey, if you know the names of these demons, you can conjure up the Ragnarok or whatever it is. Like, no, the real dangerous knowledge is you walked in on somebody you weren't supposed to walk into, saw some things you weren't supposed to see. That's the dangerous knowledge that'll really get you killed. Not this other mumbo jumbo occult stuff, which kind of sort of would lay the way for these elites to be able to do stuff like they did in the, the Diddy parties and all this stuff. Who says that, dressing up all in white, that's super occult. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, look, we saw such and such person there doing this ritual and it just so happened to involve XYZ. Oh, now we got him, boys. Or like the whole Bohemian Grove stuff. I mean, that's the whole thing of that as well. It's like, what do you guys do out there? We're just hanging out. Are you? You get what I'm saying? And
yeah.
And that would also contribute to was Alex Jones an agent that exposed the Bohemian Grove? And he was like one of the first people to really come out and videotape and all this other things. Like, was he an agent? He's very influential. Just want to remind everyone, make sure to check out the show on Patreon, patreon.com/the One-on-One Podcast. I constantly get emails. Oh, only one episode a week. Yeah, one episode a week for the public, but for as little as $5 a month, you can get up to 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 1 episode per day on the Patreon, as well as on the YouTube channel as a member for as little as $5. And there's also on the Patreon over 250 episodes only found on there. There's an extensive backlog of episodes. So check that out. For those interested, for those asking, make sure to follow the show on YouTube, One-on-One Podcast. Also, One-on-One Media. I am going live every Tuesday on there streaming. I also go live on twitch.tv/One-on-One Podcast. So make sure to check me out on there Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern. And make sure to get your copy of the Occultus Mundi Homunculus Owner's Manual, all that good stuff at tjojp.com. Can pick up your copies there or go over to the Ko-Fi. I'm on Facebook, Twitch, Kick, Rumble, all that good stuff. You know where to find it. And enjoy this episode. He's in all these circles, right? I mean, it's just something to think about.
I'm with you 100%. And I think that was definitely part of it for sure. And because of his knowledge in the occult, when he would get in these circles, he would shine. He always shone. And he would garner the eyes of whoever is kind of at the top. And we'll talk about the Golden Dawn here in a minute, because that's kind of important, because that gets him to Mexico. And that also talks about the other part of him being a secret agent. So if you know anything about secret agents, there's what they call agent provocateurs. And an agent provocateur, for people that don't know, are basically agents that are put into place to disrupt something. So a good example, when we had all the riots going on in 2020, we had stories of piles of bricks and things being laid in certain places to start things. And there would be random people that would start throwing bricks at, storefronts or whatever else. Now, people, when they're in a large group and the emotions are heightened, it's very easy to guide people down a path. And if you have what you call agent provocateurs that are integrated within, say they're feds or CIA or whatever else, they're dressed to look like everyone else in the crowd, but then they start the violence and then everyone else picks up on it. That would be an example of an agent provocateur. Now, Crowley, from all indications, was an agent provocateur because of the missions, the type of missions, even early on that they sent him on. And we'll talk about a couple of those here. Now, his first brush with the intelligent work was while he was still in school, and I was talking about that earlier. He was on a summer-long vacation in 1897, and you were talking about him being a mountain climber, and he was an avid mountain climber. Matter of fact, he was really good at mountain climbing, and we'll talk about when he was in Mexico. He did a lot of mountain climbing down there too. And instead of scaling the Alps that summer, he decided to visit St. Petersburg, Russia. Now, he said his purpose was to improve his Russian, and he not only determined on a career in the diplomatic service, but was aiming to an appointment to the most interesting and brilliant court in Europe, that of Tsar Nicholas II. And Crowley said out of his own mouth, and this is while he's still at Trinity College, and this is when he's about to go to St. Petersburg, Russia, he said, "The subtlety of intrigue has always fascinated me," which at the time didn't make a lot of sense to people when he said that. But in retrospect now, it looks like that was his first mission. Now, we don't know exactly what he was there to do, but if he's going to Russia to spy on whatever they ask him to spy on. And again, this could be like a dummy mission, right? Hey, go here, get this little information that we want you to get. It might even be that important, but they want to see if he can pull it off and he can become whatever person that they tell him to be, right? And the biggest thing with Crowley is when he would go on these missions, he would present it as him doing something else, especially early on in his career. And that's pretty typical of secret agents, and he did that here as well. Now, again, he gets back from this particular mission. We don't hear much more about it, but it seems after that it ramps up. And the fact of the matter that he would skip out on scaling the Alps to go to, random Russia, St. Petersburg to, study diplomatic service, which he ended up not even doing. That's the best part. He played this front in school like he was going to go into the government, become a diplomat. And as soon as the back end of Trinity College is wrapping up, he gets super engrossed into the occult. And when he leaves there, he decides that he's going to be an occultist and study magic. That was going to be his career, which is super weird because that doesn't really have a lot of money in it, unless you're a charlatan and you're scamming people for money. But really, there's no indication that he ever did that in his career, that he was scamming people for money, that he was trying to get money off of people to perform rituals or whatever else. Matter of fact, he detested people that did that. So that wouldn't make sense either. So from all indications, while he was at Trinity College, he was doing missions for the British intelligence.
I have this thing here that I don't know how accurate it is, but I told ChatGPT to tell me about Crowley being a secret agent.
Mm-hmm.
And so World War One, the anti-British persona in the U.S. He moved to the U.S. in 1914 and wrote pro-German propaganda for the Fatherland and publication aligned with German interests. Is that true? He portrayed himself as a traitor to Britain, advocating for Irish independency and even celebrating the sinking of the Lusitania.
So here's the thing. Him working for the Germans was a double agent move. He was actually working for the British when he was working for the Germans. So you were talking about the Lusitania, and he was actually on the Lusitania multiple times. And I actually did an entire episode on the Lusitania and Crowley. This was probably about a 2-hour episode that I did about this. It's very interesting. And it was when he first came to the United States. There are a lot of characters involved, what he was doing, who he was hobnobbing with, and when it came to art. And J.P. Morgan and the Morganites are all involved with this too. But from just a standard historical point of view, he was working with the Germans. He turned on the British. He was trying to help the Germans to scare the U.S. to not join the war, because the British wanted the U.S. to join the war and join the Allies to help take the Germans down. America didn't want anything to do with the war early on. That was the game. So he goes into, and I'm really like short wrapping all this up, but he goes into the German group that's in New York, and he starts working for this propaganda paper and starts writing for them. So basically their job is to put out propaganda in the U.S., specifically New York, to scare the U.S. citizens to not want to go to war, to not join the Allies. The Germans don't want that because the U.S. has a lot of resources. Well, the British have sent Crowley into work for the Germans. And the job of Crowley is to hype them up enough to blow up the Lusitania, which they had a U-boat that was ready for the Lusitania to come into the British port. It gets better. The day of, the same propaganda paper comes out and says that there's a possible attack. Nobody really gets off the boat but a bunch of elites before the boat leaves. Sounds a lot like some of these other things that have happened. So the boat leaves. As it's pulling into the port, there's a U-boat underneath the water, submarine, hits them with the missile. Now, the way that the Lusitania was built, it was essentially early on built for war, but it really wasn't good for that, because if you hit it in the front, the way that the balance was on the boat, it's going to go down instantly. So it killed a bunch of people, a bunch of Americans, as a matter of fact. So really what that did was hype the Americans up to go to war, not scare them to not go to war. Mm-hmm. That was the point. They needed a catalyst to kill a bunch of Americans, so then the Americans, which they didn't go right away into war, but it was about a year later. False flag. And Crowley was a part of that. Now, check this out. Because Crowley was so deeply entrenched into occult practices, that fed everything the Germans loved. The Germans loved the occult. They were super fascinated with it, and they believed everything Crowley said. Matter of fact, they never questioned once that Crowley was still working for what we would now call MI5, MI6. They thought he was sold and bought in. That's how much he had them tricked. Think about this, though. Crowley was never prosecuted. He was never got in trouble with any governments. He was living in the U.S., working for the Germans, apparently, and then the Germans blow up a boat with a bunch of Americans on it, and Crowley doesn't even get in any trouble. Didn't get in any trouble with the British. Nothing. So at some point, we have to look at it that Crowley was actually the catalyst that started the Americans' connection to World War I, or started the Americans into becoming a part of World War I, which is again, there are a lot of moving parts that got him to that point, but he wasn't the only double agent that was also working this entire Lusitania agenda. And Crowley was very familiar with the boat itself because he traveled on that specific boat several times from the UK to America and back again. So he knew the boat like the back of his hand. He would have been able to tell them. So what Crowley did, he went to the Germans, Juan, and he said, hey, they've got all these guns on this boat. They're shipping guns out for the war. The Americans aren't being upfront and honest. They're shipping guns back to the British and all these other places that the boat ported, because it wasn't just the UK. It was all kind of different places. And that's how he sold them. The thing is, they did have guns on the boat, at least initially, because it was initially constructed as a war boat. They changed it, its makeup later, but it was initially set up to be a war boat. So he wasn't necessarily lying, but he was probably lying about the extent of what was actually on the boat to get them to blow the boat up.
So this plays into, and it's a little fuzzy because it's been a little bit since I last read the book, but in Moonchild, he kind of sort of alludes to starting a sort of, a world war or a conflict of sorts, and kind of sort of hints at these magicians pulling the strings behind the scenes to have world events happen. So now that you're telling me this, and I'm putting these pieces together as to like, okay, so he was German centric, like kind of sort of putting on a facade, and that's a bit confusing. That's a bit chaotic if you really look at it, because it's like, hey, look at what the right hand is doing, but not the left hand. And this whole time, dude, I'm like, so I'm still trying to process it, because you're like, he's a double agent of a double agent. It's like, wait, what? And then it 100% fits into the whole aspect of World War II, where I've always said that World War II was an occult war. I think World War II wasn't what they've told us. How do I navigate these waters? I don't think that World War II, how do I say this? We don't have the full lowdown of World War II. And I think that there was more of occult stuff happening. And if you want to believe the number that they present, right? If you catch my drift and all this stuff, if you want to believe that aspect of it, that's kind of sort of biblical in a way. Those people that were targeted are kind of sort of biblical in a way. And in my opinion, I've never said what my true theory was of that part of World War II, right? This is going to be on YouTube, so we got to be careful because they're always watching. But I don't know did you ever see the show on HBO? The show 30 Coins. Did you ever see that show?
I started watching. I loved it, and I don't know what happened, and I got distracted. You and I were talking about 30 Coins recently. I'm sure it's a lot easier for you because you speak the language, yes. So I have to read the subtitles. But it was good. Like, I think I might have watched most of it. I loved all of it. Like, it was good. It was really good. But so, yeah, I'm familiar with it.
That show kind of fed into my theory as to why our boy Adolf did all he did. Mm-hmm. I think that he was after the Philosopher's Stone, and that would involve the sacrifice of a large amount of people. Now, you're going to have people who don't buy that narrative, but in this show, he was searching for something. He was searching for the coins of Judas, and that's why he gathered them all up, because the elite of the elite, which would have been them with all the money, would have access to this. And that's what he was looking for when he was wiping all these people out, taking all their belongings and getting rid of them, because he was looking for the coin. And if you have all the coins, you get like supernatural powers and all this craziness. But the fact that there is an occult aspect to the Nazis, and that they were looking for different relics and all these things, Himmler and his whole posse, that they were going around looking for these occult relics, the Spear of Destiny, what the hell is the other one? I'm sure they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. what's the cup? The
Holy Grail.
the Holy Grail. And that would make sense to where here is this guy who's obsessed with the occult. Let's put him in there. And you're going to be an occultist, right? And you're going to be in those circles to see what they truly have figured out. And I mean, the conspiracy theories of the Nazis and the occult goes way deep. Even in that show, they have the scene where they're at the castle trying to open up a portal to hell, which is also another one of these conspiracy theories that the Nazis were trying to open. In Hellboy, I think in Hellboy too, they have that as well.
They did open the portal in Hellboy too.
Yeah, and all the demons and everything. So
the Golden Army.
Bro, I'm just saying, like, this is just opening up other avenues as to, even if, because a part of me also believes that, because we got to understand that he was also involved with Parsons, which Parsons was more on the American side, but he was keeping he was writing back and forth. There were like pen pals. So he was kind of keeping check on Parsons, which would make sense as to report back to his superiors like, hey, this is what they're doing over there in the U.S. at the parsonage, which, again, Parsons, you got L. Ron Hubbard, you got a lot of influential people who are tied up in this, and they know Crowley. So he was like there, again, he was probably there in a sort of pseudo handler way. He was their handler in a way, and I'm sure he was reporting back and telling him like, yo, don't do the homunculus stuff, don't do all this other crazy stuff that you're doing. And who knows, dude, if all of that, which we know for a fact that the occult uses symbols to convey other messages, what if, since the beginning, right, alchemy, speaking in symbols within your own circle, in the occult, speaking in symbols within your own circle. Well, what if when they're talking about occult rituals and all these things, they're actually talking and alluding to something else? What a better way to occult it than speak in those terms that no one else is going to ever know what you're talking about. Oh, look, they're just trying to do some necromancy or something. When in reality, they're speaking in code to each other. You know what I'm saying? So,
absolutely,
dude.
And listen, Parsons was able to do what Crowley couldn't do while he was here, was spread the OTO out in the U.S. because Crowley tried, and they did try to set up a chapter in Detroit. And there's a lot of interesting stuff when it comes to Crowley and C.S. Jones, his son, quote unquote, that was in Detroit trying to set up the OTO there. And it failed. And that was when Crowley was trying to come out with his next version of the Equinox, which he couldn't even get that off the ground because he was having so many money problems at the time. And that was kind of on the back part of him leaving in 1919. But I believe while he was here in the States, I think it was solely driven by British intelligence. I think everything he did over here was connected to British intelligence. Now, I do think he deviated off from that, especially when it came to some of the occult practices that he was practicing and some of the rituals that he was doing, some of the rituals that we don't really know what he was doing. Kind of like, you know, he disappears in the Mammoth Caves for X amount of time. We have no idea what he was doing there. And this was when he was trying to set up the OTO in Detroit. And he ended up leaving in 1919, he said, because of Prohibition, because he knew when Prohibition was going to be passed, that was going to cause more evil, which is funny from the guy who they called the evilest man on earth. But that was one of the reasons that he said, at least overtly, he wanted to leave. But I think there were other reasons. I think that that British intelligence needed him for other missions. And, you know, if we dig in a little bit, go a little bit back to when he left Cambridge, and this is kind of what we were talking about, him becoming a part of secret societies to keep tabs on men in these secret societies per British intelligence, to then disrupt the plans that might be against what the British have in mind. And this is a very interesting story about that, about Crowley when he leaves this particular time, and he is deep in the occult at this point, and he just got a hold of the Book of Black Magic and of Pacts by author Edward Waite. And so Crowley is fascinated with this book and all of its suggestions of mystic brotherhoods, ancient traditions. So he actually writes Waite seeking further guidance. So Waite responds and tells him to take a look at the cloud on theistic Carl van obscure tomb by an equally obscure 18th century German mystic, Karl von Eckarthausen. So Eckarthausen studied at a Jesuit university of Ingolstadt under Adam Weishaupt. So we know who Adam Weishaupt is. He started the Bavarian Illuminati. And people wonder if Crowley knew who Adam Weishaupt was. I don't see why he wouldn't know who he was. So I think that also gave him this idea of secret societies and their importance to occult practices that he was looking to follow. So at this point, he's looking to become a part of some sort of secret society. So this is how he becomes a part of the Golden Dawn. It's a very interesting story, but if you look at it from the lens of a secret agent, it makes a little more sense how he, on some just bizarre day, gets invited to become part of the Golden Dawn. So he goes on a climbing expedition to Switzerland, and he's at a lodge near Zermatt, and he's talking to a bunch of guests, and he's talking loudly about alchemy. Now, he's unaware that within earshot, Julian Baker, who was a part of the Golden Dawn at the time, and he's an accomplished chemist and practicing alchemist, and way more versed in alchemy than Crowley ever was. So he hears him and later takes Crowley aside to instruct him, and over the next few days, he asks Crowley to be his constant companion. So Crowley starts pressing him for more information, and Baker reveals that he's a part of this mystical society, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and promises to introduce Crowley to other members when they return to London. Now, when he gets back to London, he introduces him to George Cecil Jones, and then he meets William Wynne Westcott, Florence Fair, and William Butler Yeats, which, by the way, William Butler Yeats and Crowley butted heads out the gate. Like, they could not stand each other. Matter of fact, even when he was in the U.S., Yeats was writing people that he knew Crowley and was telling them not to mess with Crowley. So they had just a lifelong beef against each other. Now, who Crowley really wanted to meet, though, was Samuel Mathers. And Samuel Mathers was a British occultist and member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and he actually was the patriarch of the order. So he gets to meet all these other guys through Baker, but doesn't get to meet Mathers yet. They're kind of holding back of him meeting them. Now, the guys that are deep into the Hermetic of the Golden Dawn, Order of the Golden Dawn, are a part of a group called the Jacobites. Now, the Jacobites, now this is all political. They're what they call legitimists, and the term is called legitimism. And the legitimists, or these Jacobites, was a society founded in 1891. And the League was considered one of the key groups in Neo-Jacobite revival. So their whole idea was to support the restoration of the House of Stuart to the thrones of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Now, this is completely against what the British want, but there were a lot of Britons who wanted this to happen. Now, Crowley played like he was a Jacobite, obviously. He would play these roles consistently. Now, he meets this guy called Bertram Ashburnham, and he was the 5th Earl of Ashburnham, and he had a large estate in Wales. Now, he was a major part of trying to bring about this Jacobite order. He had his own military training ground, and there's no evidence that Ashburnham was a member of the Golden Dawn, but politics linked him to the ultra Jacobite, who was Samuel Mathers, who I said who did run the Order of the Golden Dawn, and he said he was the chosen mouthpiece of the secret chiefs. If you know anything about the secret chiefs, these are the interdimensional beings, the Mahatmas, these interplane adepts, as they call them. These are the beings that are giving the knowledge to whoever is the head of whatever secret society. In this case, it's the Order of the Golden Dawn. So Ashburnham and Mathers, they viewed Jacobitism as a very serious, deadly business. And they were looking for a regime change by armed rebellion if they could. Now, there's another group called the Carlists, and they were of the same type of group as the Jacobites. And Ashburnham and Mathers were looking for a way to place a new leader in Spain at the time. Now, the Carlists believe that whoever ruled Spain had to be a descendant from Don Carlos, Count of Molina, to be able to take over it. Now, there was a Don Carlos of Spain at the time, Don Miguel, and they wanted to put him in place there. So this was all done through the Order of the Golden Dawn because of Ashburnham and Mathers. Now, Mathers obviously is running the Golden Dawn. And you're going to ask, where does Crowley fit into all of this? Well, he fits a big piece into this, because if Crowley, as we talked about before, is a secret agent, double agent, triple agent, as he plays, he's been asked to infiltrate the Order of the Golden Dawn to stop this process of Don Carlos II from taking what the Carlists think and the Jacobites think is his rightful place. But that doesn't jive with the British regime. It's not going to work for them. They don't want him in place because obviously Spain's not going to operate with Britain the same way that they will once Don Carlos takes over. So they want to try to stop that. As a matter of fact, in Crowley's confessions during this period of time, he says, in the service of Don Carlos, he obtained a commission to work a machine gun, took pains to make myself a first-class rifle shot, and studied drill tactics and strategy. So Crowley even talks about the fact that he is training to be an expert shot. Definitely things that you would talk about if you were a secret agent. Obviously, you're going to have to be able to work your way around guns. I'm sure Crowley, if he was actually a secret agent, was probably an excellent killer as well. We don't know the extent of that part of it. But so the idea is that they're going to ship these guns to Spain to help with this process of the takeover. And there's this personal yacht of Ashburnham called the Firefly, and they load it with all these rifles that were purchased in Germany, and they go to dispatch them in Spain. When they get there, though, at the French port of Arcachon, they get stopped, and the Spanish council demands that French customs seize the vessel. And Crowley later writes the conspiracy was disclosed. He says that the information was released prior to it actually happening. Even crazier, on the boat was a C. Alexander, which was one of Crowley's many aliases. If you know anything about Crowley, he had a list a mile long of aliases that he used in different places that he lived. Sometimes it was just an alias that he was just using for, when he was in Mexico, he went by O'Rourke. When he was there, he went by a completely different name while he was down there. So in this case, he was the C. Alexander. He's literally on the boat When this happens, and then later says that the conspiracy is disclosed, crazy enough, 30 years later, the Beast talks about the Spanish escapade, and the only thing he would say is there's a great more deal to the story, but I cannot tell it yet. And he said, and basically revealing the fact that his true role in the hand of that boat being stopped with all those weapons that would have helped Carlos become the new Don Carlos in Spain was actually stopped because of Crowley infiltrating the Golden Dawn, getting tight with Mathers, who ran the Golden Dawn, who was also friends with Ash Burnham, and then he basically was an agent provocateur and stopped the whole thing.
Listen, dude. Here, let's go back to the Mathers talking to the Bodhisattva or whoever he was talking to, the White Brotherhood or the whatever.
Million names for him.
Yeah, whatever you want to call them. Let's go off the deep end here really quick because I'm making some connections that I don't know if they should be there or not. And it's just kind of flipping my worldview right now, warping my worldview right now, real time. And I want to get your opinion on this because this is right up your alley. Okay. So the interdimensional connection, right? This is something that let's say that the occult is a gateway, no pun intended, to intelligence. Now, intelligence in the way of gathering information for other political entities, governmental entities, or intelligence of tapping into another realm, or if that's just code name for something else, right? Like, who knows? Mm-hmm. But I did recently, I did a Patreon episode on Johann Weyer, which was a live-in student to Cornelius Agrippa. And Johann Weyer wrote the Pseudomonarchium Daemonum, which is a grimoire with 69 demons. And allegedly this is what paved the way for the Goetia of the 72 demons, which we have, again, various connections there. We have King Solomon's connection there. But it's interesting that a lot of occultists, after the fact, took the Goetia and turned it into an actual thing. Little did they know, and mind you, they're modeling after Weyer's work. The problem with Weyer's work was that he did it to troll people. And he did it in a way to kind of sort of make fun, a satire, if you will, of the occult. Now, why does this all matter? Well, he was a live-in student with Agrippa. Agrippa, again, another one of these occultists that was putting out a whole bunch of stuff that kind of sort of had ties to John Dee. He had ties to what you would call intelligence, right? He was working with emperors and kings. And there's something about the class of people. And I was listening to Diana Pasolka talk on a podcast recently where she was talking about that the class of people and the true secret societies were the people who were cleaning out the bedpans of like the king or the emperor, whoever it was, because they had access to the most intimate part of the wealthy person's life, and they could gather intelligence, right, on said emperor, whatever high governmental figure. And if you look at the role of like the occultist or the alchemist, they kind of sort of play that role too. They're not in the spotlight per se, but they're working in the core of whoever it is, right? So Queen Elizabeth and John Dee, he's kind of sort of working. But if you really think about it, let's say a lot of these, similar to the church, how you go and you give your confession to the Pope or whoever it is, and they listen to you. They're getting all your dirt, bro. Right? You're telling them all your deepest, darkest secrets, and they got to remember, and they're reporting to somebody, right? Oh, you're in a booth. They can't see you. It's like, well, I'm sure they know who you are. So if you keep that in mind, what is the shaman class or the occult class? What have they always done? They've always been sort of like that. The wealthy or the elite go to them like, hey, I have this problem, especially back then. Like, hey, I might be cursed. Can you break this curse for me? Oh, what do you need? Oh, I need this information, this bodily fluid or whatever it is. So they're kind of sort of in that limelight too. And it goes back to, so this whole idea of maybe the occult being a gateway, right? So I'm sure that there's something legitimate about it, even if it is the perception of you manipulating reality, even if you're not, because that's the whole conspiracy behind the occult. Is there another world interlaced, on top of ours? Are there demons? Are there angels? Can you control those said forces? Well, Trithemius, the father of cryptography, right? He has this stenographia, which has always interested me because John Dee and Agrippa and all these guys were sort of in the same circle. Stenographia, which is his best well-known work, is a 3-volume book that appears to be about angelic magic, but is actually an advanced treatise on cryptography and covert communication. This is the father of cryptography, of encoding meanings and things that wouldn't otherwise have any meaning to anyone. Again, it goes about, you always read about, only the initiates know what they're reading about. To the initiate, the text means something completely different. So if we take that into like an intelligence perspective and go, okay, so for the initiate, like a Crowley or somebody else in his circle, hey, read this book on the Thelamite or whatever it is, right? So if all of his work comes into question as to, was it legitimately occult? Was it legitimately magical? Or was it encoding something much deeper than that is about some sort of intelligence? So if you go down the right, so you got stenographia, the practice of concealing messages within other messages, a key technique in espionage, cipher systems. Trithemius developed early cryptographic systems that influenced later European spy networks. Hidden messages. His books describe ways to encode messages within seemingly innocuous text or symbols, an essential tool for spies, right? So if we talk about, and this is just Trithemius, right? So I'm thinking, I go, okay, whatever. Let's say that these guys paved the way for intelligence. Was Trithemius a spy? Well, again, he might have been a spy. He was working with emperors and kings of his time. Okay. And then I put here, was Cornelius Agrippa a secret agent? Well, he was a diplomatic agent. He was, again, in that circle. He served as a court physician, lawyer, political advisor. Again, playing that role to nobles in France, Italy, Spain, and Germany. He worked for Emperor Maximilian I and later for the French Queen Mother Louise of Savoy, both of whom were involved in major political intrigues. And as a lawyer and diplomat, he had often access to sensitive state affairs. Okay, so I'm reading and I'm going down and I go, okay, so they were in those circles. As to if they were actual spies or not, that's up for debate. But again, if it quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So, so we have Trithemius, we have Cornelius Agrippa, then we have John Vere, which is in there, right? So he was a living student, which was weird, like at the age of 13 or 14, bro, which is super weird. Whatever, who cares? So then I go, and this is where I want to talk to you about this, because did King Solomon have spies? Because King Solomon is the father of, right, the Goetia, right? People are like, oh, it was King Solomon's seal that could control all these demons and everything. I go, so apparently he did have a network of spies, informants, and diplomatic envoys. And then I put in, you mentioned what'd you say? The Jacobians, is that what you called them?
Jacobites.
The Jacobites, right? So I put secret agents in the Bible. And I want to just run some of these past you because, again, I'm not confirming. This is ChatGPT talking to me. I'm not confirming any of the information yet. This is just the tip of the iceberg, bro. Right? So the 12 spies of Moses in Numbers 13, he sent 12 spies, one from each Israelite tribe, into Canaan to assess the land before attempting to conquer it.
So when that happened was when they had left Egypt and Moses came with 12 spies and they just got to Canaan, and it was Caleb and I forgot who the other spy was. It'll hit me in a second.
So they were spies.
So yeah, he sent spies in, and the reason why they didn't go into the promised land initially was because when they go in there, and there's a verse in the Bible, it's only the second time in the Bible that the word Nephilim's even used. When they go in there,
I'm getting there.
They see the sons of Anak, which are tall, as they look like grasshoppers in their sight, is what the verse in the Bible says. And they were of the Nephilim, and that's in Deuteronomy. So when they get back, 10 of the spies go to Moses and say, no, man, we're going to die. There's giants all in there that we can't do anything. And the other 2 spies tell Moses, no, we can. With the power of God, we can go in there and take them out. But the problem is the majority said no, and they hyped up the majority of the Israelites. So they ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. God wouldn't even let them in there until all the men that didn't want to go to battle died. And they had a new crop of men. So after 40 years, they go back in there and they end up taking out all the giants at that point, which is like Og and Sion, his brother, and all these other Rephaim at that time. So that was the initial point of the 12 spies going in there. 2 of them were okay with it, but the other 10 hyped up the whole lot of the Israelites, and then they ended up not even getting in there for 40 years.
Mission reconnaissance, right? To gather information.
Mm-hmm.
We got Rahab and the spies of Jericho. Mission covert infiltration. Before attacking Jericho, Joshua sent 2 spies to scout the city. Right? So
Rahab, and she was in this city of Jericho where there were giants as well. So the 2 spies sneak in, and she protects them. She keeps them away from the enemies there, and she gets them out safely because they are going in there to see, what they're dealing with before, they send Joshua back. It's Joshua and Caleb. Those were the 2 spies, by the way. Earlier it was Joshua. So Joshua on the walls of Jericho, you know the story. They march around the walls of Jericho 7 times, and it falls.
With like a weapon too, right? Is that
the power of God? So the deal is they tell her to leave this red rope out of her window. And if she leaves the red rope out of her window, she and her family will survive, which they do. She leaves the red rope out of the window. All the walls fall but where she's located, and she survives. Interestingly enough, Rahab is one of the few women that has been talked about as being in the lineage of Jesus himself. So she was actually a part of this line of David, or pre-David. So she was a prostitute, which also lends to the idea that, God's grace and glory like far surpasses anything else. And I find it interesting. There's a lot of like sordid people who find their way back to God who are a part of this lineage of Jesus that's coming, but she's actually a part of the lineage of Jesus as well.
I didn't know that part. That's super interesting. We have here, right? So the next one, David's Espionage Network, 2 Samuel 15:17. Mission counterintelligence and deception. The rebellion of Absalom. David planted spies and informants in Absalom's court. So we have that there. We have Joab's use of female agent, 2 Samuel 14:1-20. Psychological manipulation. David's general Joab recruited a wise woman from Tekoa to act as an undercover agent. We have Nehemiah's counterintelligence efforts. Nehemiah, am I saying that right? 6? Nehemiah?
Nehemiah.
How do you say it?
Nehemiah.
Then we have Herod and the Magi. We have Judas Iscariot and the betrayer's spy. So he acted as
Judas Iscariot. That's the Judas. That's the
that
one
is
that
the
turned
Judas,
one.
right? So it says here he acted as an informant for the chief priest, secretly negotiating the betrayal of Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He spied on Jesus' movements and led temple guards to arrest him at night, avoiding public resistance. His role fits the profile of a double agent. All right. A lot of spies in the Bible, dude. A lot of espionage, a lot of reconnaissance.
A lot of war. A lot of war that went on in the
A lot
Bible
of war.
too, man.
So here's where it gets interesting, right? Let's just.
I'm curious where you're going with
Let's
this.
just cook a little bit more. Let's just cook a little bit more, bro, please. Because this is where I want to get your take on it. Because I'm like, going back to the Mather stuff, talking to interdimensionals and reporting back to them or whatever.
Secret chiefs, man. The Greys.
The Greys or whatever. What is the Nephilim connection to intelligence and spying? And if you look at the Nephilim, right? If we take all of what we've talked about into perspective,
right?
Let's just take everything we've talked about into perspective as a way of collecting information, as a way of manipulating geopolitical events, global events, which I think the Nephilim are at the center of a lot of those, right?
Yeah.
The Nephilim, this is according to ChatGPT, again, we're just going to talk about a little bit more. They have connections to intelligence, espionage, and secret knowledge, right? That was the whole thing about the Nephilim. They were passing on secret knowledge to the daughters of men and doing things of that nature, right? Genesis 6, 1 through 4, they're described as the offspring of the sons of God, Bene Elohim, and human women, often interpreted as fallen angels, hybrid giants, or powerful rulers that were known for their strength, wisdom, and influence. Some ancient traditions depict them as keepers of hidden knowledge, which could extend to intelligence gathering, espionage, and secret warfare, right? So they had, in the book of Enoch, they knew about weapon making, war strategies, alchemy, magic, astronomy, celestial movements, sorcery. They were like the top dogs when it came to warfare. I mean, that's what they were known for, right? Weren't these guys known for their warfare? They were some of the greatest warriors that there ever was.
So like the initial connection in Enoch was the Watchers, which are the fallen angels.
Think about that, Joel. The Watchers. They're always watching, collecting.
Hey, you know what's even funnier? If you know of the Marvel Universe, and even with the Marvel movies, there is a group of beings called the Watchers, and they watch, but they don't interact. And in the multiverse, there's one particular Watcher.
You said Marvel
or
DC?
Marvel. There's one particular Watcher in the multiverse saga stuff that's going on right now. He actually gets involved. He can't allow the multiverse to die out. So he starts pulling different heroes from different universes and creates a multiversal Avengers, which is actually a cartoon that's on the Disney Channel right now. I think it went 3 seasons and it ended.
Of course. Right?
Yeah.
Disney. So, but here's what I'm struggling with. So we have the Nephilim and ancient espionage. That's going to be, hold on, Nephilim and this is going to be a title, Ancient Espionage. Nephilim, Ancient Espionage. Bro, that's a title right there. That's a title right there if I've ever seen one. So the spies sent to Canaan, how you said in the Nephilim, when Moses spies, right, they send them, they're like, hey,
Canaan.
The Canaan, they're like grasshoppers in our sight, blah, 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 right? The Watchers as observers and spies, the fallen angels in the book of Enoch are called Watchers, which implies that their role involves surveillance and observance. Nephilim, secret societies, the idea of Nephilim passed down forbidden knowledge. Nephilim and modern intelligence theories, occult warfare, psychological operations. But here's what I'm not understanding. Right, so we have the Nephilim as ancient spy masters. Right, there were observers monitoring human actions, human activities. They shared secret war strategies and hidden knowledge. But what I'm not understanding is where we get this aspect of them being, like interdimensional, and we have the flood that wiped them all out, and then the spirits of the Nephilim are the ones that are the demons and all this other stuff. I'm just trying to bridge that connection as to like where and all, because again, that's the part of the occult where I believe there might be some truth to it. Right now, my fake and gay radar is like leaning more towards fake and gay, like the occult is like leaning towards one side, and not saying that there isn't something there, but you get what I'm saying. It's like all the evidence that I've looked into, Crowley being one of them, where the occult has always been intertwined with these guys. You got William Shakespeare being a secret agent, right? And then I put here, who was Jacob in the Bible? And was he a spy? Because you mentioned the Jacob people there that were with the Mathers and all them. Turns out he was later renamed Israel, which wasn't Epstein connected to Mossad and all those people as well? Isn't that their secret organization in Israel?
Yeah, he was definitely connected to the Mossad for a long time. And, Jacob, the story of Jacob is very interesting too because of his connection with Esau, his brother.
Yes.
So Esau breaks out and creates the Edomites. And the Edomites are, for all intents and purposes, were connected directly to the Nephilim. Some people think that Esau was the first Bigfoot. People talk about that all the time.
So that story, Joel, reconnaissance, disguise, and deception, classic espionage tactics, which was Jacob, right? So you have that connection there as well with Esau and all them. And again, it goes deep, bro. And then, you have, so I'm like, okay, right. So we have this interdimensional demonic aspect to the Nephilim. How could we work that in, right? So and the common denominator here is the Bible, right?
Right.
Now, we have multiple translations and multiple sources for the Bible. We have various texts, some saying that they're the originals. The other one says that they're the originals. Some say that that's a translation of the other one. We don't really know who came first, right? I think is the Masoretic text, is that the one that is the official one, or was it the Septuagint is the other one?
Yeah, you're talking about the OT, right? And then you're talking about the Septuagint for the New Testament.
I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the origins of the Bible and the text itself.
The Vaticanus is, I believe, the first Greek translation of the New Testament, if I'm correct. I know the Sinaiticus was right after that.
So the debate is, was it in Hebrew first, or was it in Greek? Anyways, you get what I'm saying. Like, there's debates.
Well, if you go the Ammon Hillman route, he thinks the Septuagint was the very first thing, and then the Hebrews wrote after that, which I find absolutely ridiculous. So
all right,
I'm not going to buy into that crap.
William Shakespeare, right? If we take into account William Shakespeare and the King James Version of the Bible and all these guys, well, William Shakespeare was also said to have been a secret agent as well during his time. And if we look back at the Francis Bacon connection, him maybe being William Shakespeare or whatever, the whole conspiracy, is it a possibility that they could have put some of this espionage stuff in there? Again, part of their intelligence work. I don't know. I'm just trying to draw a bridge. You get what I'm saying? I'm trying to where the interdimensionalism and all this stuff of the Watchers comes into play, because it always seems like every single religion, if you will, has this same aspect. There is a higher level outside of reality,
right,
influencing reality, and then there's always middlemen between that. Like, they're talking. Were they actually talking to interdimensionals, or was it a higher up that they just called an interdimensional to be like, hey, we were talking to the Watchers. Were you really? You get where I'm going with this, bro? Like,
and if you look at it from just a straight humanistic standpoint, it's very possible. And I'm not saying that it's not possible.
And I'm not saying the Nephilim are fake and gay. I'm just saying.
I get where you're going with it. And I don't think, here's what I do know. So Crowley's Confessions, which was his diary, he wrote in sporadically. He would write for like a year straight, then all of a sudden be a month missing. And then he would just pick it up like nothing happened. And this happened specifically in Mexico. And this is when he was doing a lot of deep work in Mexico. And I was getting into that anyway, so like I'll just shift to that part. So basically, he hits New York Thursday, July 5th, 1900. Well, as he's pulling in there was a massive boat oil explosion. So like The docks are all burning. New York's kind of burning when he gets there. So he spends about 3 days there, and he writes in his diary, his confessions, that it's super hot, and he's just, he's being dramatic. So he gets on the train, he gets down to Mexico, and this is when like the real fun starts, when he gets to Mexico, because this is when he really starts operating on more of an occult level than he has before. Now, the initial reason why he said he was going to Mexico was to spread the Golden Dawn, the order in Mexico. It didn't make a lot of sense, though, because he never once tried to do any work there to do that. The whole time he's there, he's not even once trying to do that. Now, while he's there, he loves it. He goes to Mexico City. He loves the way that people drank liquor to get drunk. He loves the gambling, the sex, and he likes the way that they look at their Catholic faith, right? He doesn't like Christianity or anything to do with it, but he loves the way that they do it, because they're basically loving life and not really caring, I guess, about the Bible that they're reading. They're just doing whatever, and I guess they're going to confession on Sunday, and they're okay.
Yeah.
Now, Porfirio Diaz, who was the president at the time, and that's important, Crowley states in his confessions that he loves him, thinks he's one of the best presidents ever that he's ever met in any country, and he's just all about it. Now, while he's there, this is in his diaries, what starts showing up in his diaries are his magical practices. He starts exploration of the aethers, these interplane territories ruled by angelic figures of all these different characteristics. And they were delineated from John Dee and Edward Kelly. And Crowley says in his diaries that he has limited initiation, which is giving him limited access. So while he's there, he's training himself to learn the ritual of self-initiation while he's there. So he's initiating himself in these practices. He learns the correct spelling of abracadabra, and he learns the gematria and the numerology that's equated to abracadabra, which is 418, anybody that wants to know that. And he says, again, that he's leaning into bringing the Golden Dawn there. That's just on the surface, right? Now, he meets this guy called Don Jesus de Medina, and he's a fellow occultist and leading figure in Mexican Scottish Rite Freemasonry. He actually brings Crowley in, and Crowley becomes a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason in Mexico, which is funny because he was swooped right in to become a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason in Mexico, but he was denied access in the States, and that's why he hated Freemasons in the States. They didn't want really anything to do with him. He didn't want anything to do with them after they basically snubbed him. And I get it, because everywhere else he went, he was allowed in. Now, he and Don Jesus form this society called the Lamp of the Invisible Light. It's their own secret society while they're there. So part of this creation of this secret society, Crowley starts doing all these rituals. Of course, he's still trying to perform this operation of the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage. He hasn't figured it out yet. He does figure it out later on when he gets back in England, but he does not figure it out yet. But part of that is him learning knowledge and conversation with holy guardian angels and higher and divine genius, how to connect to what you were just talking about, these other entities, because at this point he hasn't really figured any of this out yet. And this is far before the Book of the Law and him meeting Iowa, so he hasn't even met his personal holy guardian angel yet. But as a part of these rituals, and this is all in his diaries, he tries to start summoning and invoking these Abramelin classification of 4 princes of the demons, Lucifer, Leviathan, Satan, and Belial, and 8 sub-princes, Astaroth, Maggot, Asmodee, Beelzebub, Orions, Paimon, Eraton, and Amion. And all of them are subject to the will of the Lord of the universe. Now, he and Don Jesus are trying to invoke these entities in their morning invocations. And this is a part of this invisible light, this order of the invisible light that they're trying to bring these entities to fruition, try to connect to these entities to try to get these things to happen. Now, Jesus was super impressed with his knowledge of the Kabbalah, and Crowley actually spelled it with a Q, and I found that interesting, especially if we want to tie it into QAnon and some of the things that went through that, right? So I think there's definitely a correlation there as well. But it's very important that he joined this order of Freemasonry at the 33rd degree with Don Jesus, because we just brought up the president who was one second, sorry about that.
There you go. I don't remember his name either. So and
Diaz. Yeah. So Diaz. And part of him joining this order of Freemasonry to meet with Porfirio Diaz was to buddy up with him, because England, who was changing over how they fueled their boats from coal to oil, they needed the oil to be able to create the petroleum to be able to do this. So Crowley gets with Porfirio Diaz, and Diaz actually brokers a deal right after that with the heads over in the intelligence departments, or just the head over this section of petroleum and all that, and connects them together, and they broker the deal. They got the deal over the U.S. They got the deal over all these other countries that were trying to get it, because this time it was very hot. You wanted oil because oil could do a lot for you. And if you're changing over the fuel systems in your boats, this is what you want to do. Funny enough, right after that deal's done, Crowley's gone. He leaves Mexico. He doesn't even stay around. He's gone. But I think this is that classic duality. I believe he literally was there. I think he was trying to invoke these entities. He talks about it in his diaries. Now, you're wondering how I want to tie it into what you just said. I believe that in his diaries that he did have knowledge that was specifically for secret intelligence. And I think that some of what you were just talking about, some of these magical invocations and some of that did have that layered in. That has been suggested even by Richard B. Spence, that if somebody was to find his diaries, that there was nothing in it outside of occult knowledge and hey, I'm just
cryptography, bro.
I'm just doing my thing. I'm climbing mountains, right?
Yeah.
Talking to angels. But there would be these big gaps. Like when he was in Mexico, there was this one gap for like a month and a half to 2 months. And then all of a sudden he just picks it up and starts writing again. Like it was the next day, but it's not. It's 2 months later. What happened during that gap of time? What's going on there? So he would just go off the map a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think those were times when he was legitimately on certain missions. And I do think that he was very careful with what he wrote in his diary, because if somebody was to get a hold of his diaries that was a part of some other intelligence group, you wouldn't want them to know what it was. But I do believe in those diaries, if someone in his organization had read them, there were probably things layered in that would have been deciphered. And it may have been deciphered too if something happened to him. You know, if he died or something like that, within those layers that was there. Listen, this is what I honestly think about Crowley, Juan. I honestly believe he was an occultist. I honestly believe he was deeply involved in magic, and I think he was very good at it. I don't think he was a charlatan to that extent. I think he loved it. But I do think that he was still a charlatan too. I think he was also a triple agent. So I do think that that's there too. So we're never really going to know the truth, right? We're just going to have these pieces of his life and slowly piece some of that together and speculate. That's all we can do. Listen, we've got our own federal government telling Richard B. Spence that we're not giving you anything on Crowley. They didn't even say they didn't have it. We're just not going to give it to you.
They didn't deny it, yeah.
They had a lot. They have stuff on him. We know for a fact. I just showed you the slip. We know that MI5 and MI6 had paperwork on him. We don't know what it was. Yeah. It disappeared when they were, fell out. I don't know.
Yeah, it's redacted. And think about this, bro. So you're talking about what a better way than to hide and, hidden in plain sight. So it looks really bad if you have a foreign power sending and establishing a military base on your land. But hey, it's just a secret society, freedom of religion, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it just so happens to be that the people who run the country just so happen to be also involved in this stuff. If it is bullshit or not, we don't know, right? I think maybe they thought that they were magicians, and when in reality, I'm sure he was invoking these things and nothing was happening. Oh, well, let's just move on, right? It's like, so what a better way than to infiltrate a government than by masquerading as even a church, bro? Like any church that which I'm sure we just read biblical espionage, and there's been books written on the whole thing too. I mean, hidden in plain sight. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning, where the lethal knowledge and the esoteric and forbidden knowledge isn't like, hey, you know how to invoke Beelzebub or whatever. It's like, no, I saw the president of such country doing XYZ to XYZ, and I've got a video of it. That will get you killed. Or hey, I invoked Beelzebub and I have the formula, the goetic formula, how to do that. Maybe that's code for what I just said. Like, hey, we got the formula of Baal or whatever. Yeah. Invoking it. It's like, I got it. And you just move on. You seal the deal and you move on. Point is that these governmental entities are using this as a facade. Oh, shit. Look at that. Look at that. The government just knocked over my mic, dude. We're getting too close to the truth, bro. Dude. You saw that?
I did. That's crazy, man. Your mic almost just...
Oh, man. Okay. So, anyways, yeah, dude. You just opened up a can of worms, and I'm looking at this from a whole different perspective. And they're trying to silence me right now by knocking my...
And I agree with you, Juan, and I've definitely been down that road mentally with how I thought about a lot of this, because to be honest with you, when I really got back into studying Crowley about 2 years ago, I really took like the occulted part out and just started looking at the man and just the machinations of a normal human being, right? Or what we would consider a normie. And I started looking at some of those things as I was looking into him being a secret agent. And I totally agree with you. I just personally think that there is a magic occult side of it too. I think it's married together. And I do think that you are spot on with some of those, especially his diary, and we're just talking about anybody else that's a part of the quote-unquote occult world, and then a secret agent, that they probably got some sort of codex or something that's written in the spaces, written in the lines, that they could literally be doing two things at once. They could be talking about...
Well, and that's the thing.
Invoking something seriously, but at the same time... How about this? We know that governments... Since we were just talking about the book of Enoch, but we know about governments being connected to quote unquote interdimensional beings and all this stuff anyway.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't it be a marriage of both? Why wouldn't it be the combination of both? If there's a way to be able to do both at the same time and still, if somebody picked it up, have no clue what's going on, boy, that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate level up.
And think about it, dude. It's because I think we focus on like this compartmentalization of all these different aspects. Like when people study John Dee, they just study his occult. They don't study his
Right.
political. They don't study his geographical influence. They don't, and it's like how you're saying they're all married together, and you just got to be able to step back and go, wait a minute, let's look at a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of that, and then you can make those connections. So I'm just looking at it from a different perspective. I'm stepping back and going, I know this is what I know, but let's step back and look at it from a different way. Like, could it all be this? And it makes sense to me. I'm still going to do the research, but I can see it. Like, I can see the vision, right, of this being some sort of network sprinkled in with some of the real, right?
Yeah.
Or even if they perceive that they were doing what they were doing, right? Because that's another thing. Like, if you perceive that you're doing something, that's a whole other aspect. Like,
Right.
And if you bring in like the espionage and all this other stuff, it's like, well, what a better way than to enter a character, like quite literally, and become a different person. And that's the whole thing about the occult, right? You have to, the way I've come to understand it is, even if you're not bringing forth a change with your invocations or whatever it is, you're putting yourself in a state of mind in order to bring forth some change or accept the change that's going to come. Right. And that's like training yourself to opening yourself up, essentially. Right. So I don't know, man. I have a lot more questions than answers at this point, but it's super interesting nonetheless.
It's always going to be that way. And dude, I've been studying this part of Crowley for about 2 years now, and I don't even think I've even gotten close to anything, and I'm still studying it. And it's just going to be, again, when I took the occult part out of Crowley and I just started looking at him working for the government, gave me a whole different perspective of a lot of what he was doing. Just like you said, I think that some of the stuff he was writing could have been completely benign, could have been something that was used in a different sector. It might not even been quote unquote occulted knowledge at all. It might have been hidden knowledge in the sense of for the reader, but it might not have been something that was actually trying to invoke.
But that's the thing, dude.
An angelic being or whatever else. However, I think he was doing that too.
You will have people who will read these things and they take it at face value. So they take all the workings of Abramelin and all the Enochian workings, and they quite literally establish the Golden Dawn off of it and all these other things. And look at even Freemasonry, where it's got a lot of Egyptian iconography and influences within that. So you have people who are taking these concepts and then doing something, even if there wasn't anything to start from the beginning, which is fine too. It's called LARPing. You're role playing. And again, you're doing your little rituals and doing everything to make yourself feel good or invoke Asmodeus or whoever it is that you're invoking. And you're taking a system that you really didn't know anything about and just, that's chaos magic, dude. You're making it and using it for whatever you want, which is fine. We all have a way of coping with things. We all have a way of looking at reality the way that we do. And sometimes that involves using different systems. For some people, it's the Christian church, the Bible, the King James Version or whatever. For other people, it's Hinduism. Or for other people, it's Taoism. For other people, it's whatever. And it's just a system of beliefs to portray the world and perceive reality in whichever way you want, which is totally okay. Right. So, yeah, dude, it's super, super interesting in my opinion. And you just open up like a whole, I'm just making connections here. I'm like, what? And a lot of stuff starts making sense. And again, I could be making sense of stuff that doesn't even need to be made sense of, right? Like I could be interpreting it completely different. And I don't have like anything of a breakthrough. And I just think I made this breakthrough. It's like, no, you're just, pareidolia or whatever. You're connecting dots where they're not even there. Which that's also a possibility.
I think you're onto something there, because that's something that I realized. Sense. Yeah, and I've read Crowley a ton of his stuff, and specifically his diaries, and some of the stuff just seemed weird. Like, why is this here? Like, what is he talking about?
Poetry,
here? Right? And then even outside the poetry, where it'll just be, what are you yapping about right now? That doesn't make any sense. And then if you look at it from the lens of, oh, so this might have been some sort of codex, or this might have been something else, especially when we really look at him being this secret agent working for British intelligence.
Yeah.
And listen, no matter what anyone says about Crowley, the guy was stupid smart. Again, he went to Trinity College in Cambridge, and guys that go there are not stupid. They're just not. And he graduated. The guy's smart. And if you just want to say he's a charlatan, cool. That works very well with him being a secret agent.
Yep.
So all of these things work. He had the perfect formula for what they were looking for, because he's bisexual, which means that they could infiltrate him in either side, because women loved him and men loved him too.
Yeah.
He was very...
He had that riz, bro.
He did. That's the perfect way to put it. He had that...
Alchemical riz.
He had that 1890 riz. Like, he did.
I'd be interested to see that class roster and seeing who else in that class also turned out to be a political figure or somebody else, you know, in some other place of power, which, again, a lot of these schools, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, a lot of these schools seems to be more of a recruiting center for a lot of intelligence stuff, right?
Trinity College is one of them. And I'm going to tell you right now that I have studied a ton of different historical figures over the past year, and almost all of them, the ones I'm really interested in, went to Trinity College. And I just find this weird thread where they're all coming out of Trinity College. I'm like, what is going on? What's going on here? I mean, even the father of the computer went to Trinity College in Cambridge. So your boy.
Charles Babbage?
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Again,
I'm just the center of it all. Yeah.
I'm just saying that they're all coming out of this one place.
Damn, dude. Listen, where can people find you? Where can people go listen to all the other interesting podcasts you put out? Because you put out a podcast along this same line of thinking. Where can they go?
Yeah, find me at Free the Rabbits. If you're looking to just get to everything I do, go to Linktree/Free the Rabbits, and you'll find everything. But if you're looking for the podcast, just go to Free the Rabbits on YouTube, Rumble. You can find Free the Rabbits on any other audio platform. And if you're looking for any of my music, you just type in Joel Thomas on any music streaming platform as well. I've got a ton of films that are coming out this year. We've got 2 films. We've got one coming out in like 2 or 3 months, where we went to this place called the Meadow Project. We had to sign an NDA to go there, and we ended up finding some really weird stuff that, you know, isn't explainable. And then we shot another film with you and Isaac Weishaupt and Tony Merkel, and that was just a fantastic journey of a marriage between information and boots on the ground. So it's our first documentary that's that type of style, and it's all based around Crowley and his connections with the government and interdimensional beings.
So keep an eye out for that. Make sure to check him out. Links down in the description. Make sure to follow me on social media at the One-on-One Podcast. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, One-on-One. Make sure to follow on the RSS feed. If you're over on the YouTube and you just want to get the audio, pop it into a podcast player, listen to it while you're at work or whatever it is. And if you're interested in more episodes per week, patreon.com/the One-on-One Podcast. I'm putting out 2-3 extra episodes a week, early access. So you'll have this episode early if you're on there, and you'll see it a week or 2 before it comes out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Make sure if you want merch, links all down in the description. And as always, everyone, see you on the next one.